Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise in this House to participate in the budget debate. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are located on Treaty 4 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I am honoured to represent the constituents of Saskatoon, Churchill-Wildwood in this Assembly and speak on their behalf. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we do not do our work alone in isolation as MLAs. We are supported by many. I would like to thank the Legislative Assembly clerks, the caucus office staff, and all who assist us in this historic building. I am also fortunate to have two constituency assistants who job share and do such fine work representing me in my constituency office, Candice Forrester and Betty Weller. They are the first voice that constituents hear when they contact my office, and they are patient, efficient, and professional in their work. I am grateful to have my husband Jim by my side. God willing, we will celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary this summer. Thank you. We were together for 5 years before we were married, so it has been 45 years that we have walked this life path together. He is a good man, a steadfast husband, and a committed father to our 3 adult daughters, Amy, Monique, and Janelle. We have been blessed with 5 grandchildren, Gianna, Isabella, Lucas, Sebastian, and Dominic, and we have welcomed 2 sons-in-law to our family, Carl Peters and Aaron Wigness. Our dining room table continues to grow. The war in Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, the dark moments that are devastating that country and its people are ongoing. We began this session with a motion calling for Russia to stop their unprovoked aggression towards neighbouring Ukraine. I know that communities across the province have been showing their support for Ukraine. One of those in the Saskatoon community is Myron Sermon, owner of the Touch of Ukraine restaurant. He is holding 2 takeout dinner fundraisers for Ukraine. One has already happened last week. I got to know Myron long ago when I would book him to cater lunches at CTV Saskatoon. He has been operating his restaurant and catering business since 1987, and his food is delicious. My personal favorites are the pierogies and oven chicken. Myron's father came to Canada from Ukraine in the late 1920s, leaving behind most of his immediate family. Here's what Myron had to say, quote, "Ukrainians are brave people. They're hard-working people. They're going to fight for their country because they've been under suppression for so many years. I think they've just had it. They're going to put their lives on the line," end quote. Myron said his fundraiser will be a way of bringing the community together through food and Ukrainian culture. Quote, "It's comfort food. It takes people back to their childhood, remembering Baba's kitchen at the farm and the gatherings at Baba and Dita's home, when times were simpler and more peaceful than they are right now," end quote. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can relate to that comfort food. My mother-in-law, Kathy Lambert, is Ukrainian. Her mother, Elena Medvedyuk, nee Lepka, immigrated from Ukraine, and her father, John Medvedyuk, was born in Ukraine. Jim and I would make regular treks to Winnipeg and stay with Little Baba, as Jim's grandmother was called. She lived on Archibald Street in her home until well into her 90s, and she passed away in 2005 at the age of 99. We enjoyed many delicious pierogi meals in that small and loving home where she tended her very large garden. Generations of Ukrainians have chosen Saskatchewan as the place to call home. Approximately 15% of residents of this province trace all or part of their ancestry to Ukraine. So Ukrainian culture and traditions here have deep roots. We are committed to welcoming those who are fleeing the violence in Ukraine. We will accept unlimited numbers of Ukrainians, and priority will be given to SNIP applications received from Ukraine. Our government is working with community members to ensure there is support, programs, and services ready, so Ukrainian newcomers are welcome in our communities and experience successful resettlement. Saskatchewan stands against tyranny and stands with Ukraine, its people, and its sovereignty. It's been 2 years, Mr. Deputy Speaker, since the World Health Organization described COVID-19 as a pandemic. Here in this province, a provincial state of emergency was announced on March 18, 2020, and this legislature was suspended on that day. We could not have envisioned what was to come, an economic and health crisis of such scope, of such magnitude, lockdowns, school closures, job losses, small business owners struggling to survive, nonprofit organizations trying to meet increasing demands. Many adjectives became the norm in describing these times: unprecedented, uncertain, difficult, challenging. There are those who remain hesitant to get a COVID-19 vaccine. The Saskatchewan Health Authority has done a good job of answering common vaccine questions from the public and addressing COVID-19 myths. I would like to go over a few of those questions and myths for the record. Question: how can we be sure that vaccines are safe when they were rushed through so quickly? The answer is, it can seem like the vaccine development was fast compared to other medications, but no steps were skipped during their trials. Globally, governments and manufacturers invested massive amounts of funding and support and removed red tape to create these life-saving vaccines as fast as possible in our time of need. Research to understand the virus has been ongoing since the SARS outbreak in 2002-2003. There's a myth that vaccines alter DNA. The fact is, vaccines cannot and do not change your DNA. Because some vaccines are made with mRNA, there was a myth that it could change your DNA. RNA is not capable of changing DNA. Instead, it simply tells your cells to produce the specific antigens your body needs to fight COVID-19. Another question: how effective can the vaccines be if we need a booster? Well, the answer is viruses change and evolve, which is why we have flu shots every year. Initially, being fully vaccinated provided enough protection, but over time, variants of COVID-19 began to appear and immunity began to decrease, particularly among the immunocompromised and the elderly. Boosters help to top up our protection against catching and spreading COVID-19. If you look at the number of deaths and hospitalizations from COVID, you will find that fully vaccinated people with boosters are far less likely to become severely ill. Then there's the myth that people should have the choice to vaccinate because the choice only affects you. Well, you do have the choice to vaccinate, but it doesn't only affect you. If you catch COVID-19, you can spread it to everyone you come near, putting them at risk. You could also become very sick and end up in the hospital, putting an unnecessary strain on our healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, I would like to spend a couple of moments talking about vaccine efficacy. The following is an article posted by the SHA on March 22nd, just a few days ago. Quote, vaccine efficacy is a measure of how well a vaccine protects against infection during clinical trials using tens of thousands of participants. The calculation used to determine efficacy is the same for all vaccines. However, with the COVID-19 vaccines, there was no way to compare vaccines one-to-one based on an efficacy rating. Because the trials were held at different times and in different parts of the world with different sets of data collected, so they don't share the same conditions. The goal of a vaccine is to reduce hospitalization and death, not to prevent any infection at all. No vaccine is 100% effective against infection, end quote. There is still some concerns, particularly from parents, about vaccine side effects. As of February 27th of this year, side effects for children aged 5 to 11 in Saskatchewan were 0.09 per 1,000 vaccinations, and serious side effects were 0.01 per 1,000. Thankfully, a very small number of children in this province will experience a serious side effect from vaccination. So the point here I'm trying to make is, if you haven't done so, please don't hesitate. Please get vaccinated. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to express sincere and heartfelt appreciation to the healthcare workers in Saskatchewan for keeping us informed, safe and healthy, and for their continued good work as we transition to living with COVID-19. I also express my deepest condolences to the families who have lost loved ones in this province. Now, the matter at hand, the budget. There are those who call the increase in mental health and addictions a shadow pandemic. As people found themselves isolated indoors for prolonged periods of time, depression and anxiety levels increased. There were reported increases in addiction and substance abuse during the pandemic, with approximately 16% of Canadians reporting that they had been struggling with addiction issues such as drugs and alcohol. As Colleen Cameron, a commissioner with the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, wrote in the 2020-2021 annual report, quote, COVID-related fears and anxieties experienced by the general population have been amplified and magnified in those with pre-existing mental health and addictions issues. The hard truth of the matter is that it is going to take a long time before we are able to fully grasp the scope of the mental health and addictions challenges born out of this pandemic, end quote. I am encouraged, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this budget includes an additional $8 million for targeted mental health and addiction services. That includes counselling, treatments, and other preventative measures. We have increased addiction spaces in treatment centres across the province for $2.1 million. That brings the total investment for mental health and addictions to $470 million, or more than 7% of the total health ministry budget. Mr. Speaker, I have the honour of representing the highest density of seniors in this province. I know that it is welcome news to low-income seniors that this government will fulfill the second year of a 3-year commitment to increase benefits for the Seniors' Income Plan. The maximum SIP payment will increase to $330 per month in July. The record $6.8 billion for the health budget includes $21.6 million in order to fund thousands of additional surgeries to address wait times. This is the first year of a 3-year plan to deliver the largest volume of surgical procedures in the history of our province. The most commonly delayed surgeries here are knee replacements, hip replacements, and cataract procedures. So older adults will be pleased with this initiative to tackle the surgery wait list very aggressively. In the spring 2022 Grey Matters publication, put out by the Saskatchewan Seniors Mechanism, the minister responsible for seniors wrote, and I quote, "Saskatchewan seniors have consistently told me they prefer to live comfortably and independently in their own homes and communities. Our government is listening and continues to build and maintain supports and programs to help older adults achieve this goal. This desire to age in our own communities is not unique to Saskatchewan. In fact, it was the #1 topic when I met with other provincial and federal ministers responsible for seniors this past month." End quote. It is good to see that there is a $17 million increase in this budget to support seniors who want to stay in their homes safely and comfortably. And that includes a $4.8 million increase for home care services. In that same Grey Matters edition, John Knight has this advice about growing old, and I quote, "Wisdom is king, and we are the people that have this wisdom. It can only be earned by living and learning. None of us should retire from life. We all have a lot to contribute. As we age, we need to keep learning new things, new hobbies, or new careers. We need to learn to live until we die. This is the way to be happy and fulfilled." End quote. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I reached a milestone birthday this month. A woman doesn't tell her age. I'm not going to say what it is, but I am going to say I'm going to pay closer attention to that advice that I just read. It is exciting for the film and television industries that this budget commits to an increase of $8 million to Creative Saskatchewan for the production grant program, bringing the total of that fund to $10 million. It is expected that this will result in a significant increase in film and TV production in the province, not to mention the spin-off in economic activity in the hospitality industry, for example, and growth in our IT and digital service industries. Only Saskatchewan labour, goods and services are eligible for support under this program. That ensures that this investment benefits this province. Recent employment and population data released by Statistics Canada show that the Saskatoon region is leading the way in both employment and population growth, and that points to a promising future, both for Saskatoon and for the province. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Saskatoon government MLAs recently met with Saskatoon City Council. At that meeting, we were given information based on the January 2022 Statistics Canada Labour Force Survey that Saskatoon has the highest employment growth rates in the province and the highest employment rates in the country. Saskatoon saw year-over-year employment changes of 11.4%, the highest in Canada, and an employment rate of 67.4%, the highest of any city in the country. The number of new persons employed year-over-year represented 97% of Saskatchewan's employment growth over that period. The Saskatoon Regional Economic Development Authority wrote an excellent article in the winter 2020 edition of the Industry West magazine, and I want to share a small part of that article. Quote, "Saskatoon has been described as SaskTech and the Silicon Valley of the prairies. Our entrepreneurial spirit is rich in our technology sector. We have many successful entrepreneurs who have grown their companies to be major employers, brought in external venture capital, and become important contributors to Saskatoon's economy. We are also home to CoLabs, Saskatchewan's technology incubator, with more than 30 companies at all stages of growth, end quote. Speaking of jobs, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this budget includes $3.1 million to fully fund the international trade and investment strategy that will advance the province's economic interests abroad. Expanding our export markets translates to new jobs and new opportunities right here at home. This past year alone, we opened new Saskatchewan trade offices in London, Dubai, Mexico City, and Ho Chi Minh City that join existing offices in Japan, India, Singapore, and China. These offices will allow Saskatchewan to increase exports, generate more investment, and engage with new international trade partners. In 2021, we saw unprecedented investment in our province of over $10 billion. So continuing to build a competitive business environment and grow in our international presence results in new projects, new facilities, and new jobs right here in Saskatchewan. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Saskatchewan exports 65% of everything that it produces. We used to be known as the wheat province, but now we are known as the potash, oil, and wheat province. We are also Canada's export province. We are the world's largest exporter of pulse crops, the leading exporter of durum wheat, mustard seed, canary seed, and oats. We are the world's leading exporter of potash and the second leading producer and exporter of uranium. A key driver of our province's economy is our oil and gas sector, which accounts for 15.5% of provincial GDP. One might say that export trade is the lifeblood of our economy. Paul Huber, publisher of Industry West magazine, wrote an article in the winter 2020 edition, quote, "Reading an article recently on the downfall of the British Empire, it was interesting to learn the great economic mishandlings that caused its gradual decline. Here stands a great historic lesson that we can learn from. Always strive to be on the side of economic history. It is safe to say that the future is going to be driven by technology. It will also be driven by agriculture as the world's population grows and needs to eat. I strongly believe that Saskatchewan's burgeoning tech sector is a byproduct of our excellent resource agriculture and manufacturing sectors. The natural home for tech innovation for these sectors is here in Saskatchewan," end quote. Mr. Speaker, this province has a thriving tech sector that is getting attention on a global scale. This budget will continue to invest in tech startups through the Saskatchewan Technology Startup Incentive, creating more jobs and bringing new products to market right here in Saskatchewan. This budget increases the STSI tax credit cap from $2.5 million to $3.5 million. The Premier spoke on Budget Day, Mr. Deputy Speaker, about how those of us who are privileged to sit in this House, to occupy a seat in this elective assembly, have a common goal. That common goal is that we all want to see Saskatchewan do well and reach its potential. This is what unites us here as we do our work as legislators. We work together to build a better future for all who call Saskatchewan home. That better future has to include a strong and growing economy, job creation, and high-quality government services. We are on our way, Mr. Deputy Speaker. New jobs have been created in this province, 30,000 in the past year. We are thankful that the financial picture is also getting back on track, which has allowed us to significantly reduce the deficit and move forward to balancing the budget in coming years. We will continue to build strong communities and a diverse, resilient, and strong economy that will help to build a better Saskatchewan. In closing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, John Gormley of radio fame delivered a rant last September in response to an article in a local Saskatoon paper. It was about COVID-19 in Saskatchewan. I worked directly with John on his talk show in the early 80s, before he was elected as a Member of Parliament. His words stuck with me, and I would like to share some of those words with the Assembly tonight. Quote, "Here's a rant. I'm looking at my local paper, how the fourth wave of COVID-19 beat Saskatchewan. I don't know who writes in these newspapers, and I don't know who writes the headlines, but let's talk a little about beating Saskatchewan. COVID has tied a bit of beating on us, to be sure, but past tense, it has beat Saskatchewan. Do you know where you live, whoever wrote this story and wrote this headline? A land forged by pioneers who came from here from all over the world, and often the first winter dug into the side of a hill and lived in a cave. Or they erected a lean-to and they lived in that. And then they pulled enough money together for a plow and a horse and they began to grow things. Sounds like my grandfather. And they lived through minus 40 winters. Then for 10 years, the worst financial and weather crisis in the history of the modern world in the 1930s decimated one province over every other, Saskatchewan. 2 world wars with the highest volunteer rate and death rate of any province. The boys who went and gave their lives from Saskatchewan. A span of 120 years where when bad things happen to people, when they get sick, when tragedy befalls them, when their barn burns down, what does the community do? It pulls together to triumph and overcome. You want me to go on about some of the most resilient, hard, unbeatable people on the planet? We lose on the football gridiron, the Riders, hockey club, farmer on the wrong end of the drought. On the ice, you might take a beating, somebody gets the better of you, but nothing ultimately beats Saskatchewan. Not drought, acts of nature, politics, perfidy, human wrongdoings. We endure, we persist, and we come back every time. End quote. Thank you, John. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I couldn't agree more. God bless Saskatchewan. God bless Ukraine. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will be supporting the motion brought forward by the Minister of Finance and seconded by the member from Moose Jaw North, and I will not be supporting the amendment. Thank you.